The lights go out. At first, nobody panics. You assume it'll be back in an hour, maybe 2. You check your phone. You look outside. You notice your neighbors' houses are dark too. It feels strange but manageable. Then dinner time arrives. You open the refrigerator. You open the freezer. And suddenly, you realize something. Most of the food in your house depends on electricity. Frozen meals, fresh meat, milk, cheese, leftovers. Everything now has a countdown. People spend years filling refrigerators. Very few spend time thinking about what they could eat if none of it worked. That's why this list matters. These aren't survival foods. These aren't strange military rations. These are ordinary grocery store foods that require little or no preparation, no electricity, and in many cases, no cooking at all. The interesting thing is that most people walk past them every single week. They don't seem important until the power goes out. Then they become some of the most valuable foods in the house. Let's start with one that almost everyone underestimates. Peanut butter. It doesn't look impressive. It's just a jar sitting on a shelf. But open it during a blackout and suddenly you understand why it's one of the most practical foods you can own. It doesn't need refrigeration before opening. It doesn't need heating. It doesn't need cooking. It provides protein, calories, healthy fats, and perhaps most importantly, it actually feels like food. That's something people often forget. A lot of emergency foods provide calories. Not all of them leave you feeling satisfied. Peanut butter does. Spread it on crackers. Eat it with apples. Put it on bread. Or simply eat a spoonful if that's all you have. Very few foods provide so much value with so little effort. That's why people consistently wish they'd bought another jar instead of another bag of chips. The second food is crackers. This one sounds almost too simple. Until you start looking around your kitchen. Bread doesn't last forever. Fresh rolls certainly don't. Frozen bread becomes difficult if the freezer starts warming up. Crackers quietly solve that problem. They store well, require absolutely no preparation, pair with almost everything. Peanut butter, canned meat, cheese while it's still cold, honey, jam, even canned beans if necessary. People often think of crackers as snacks. They're much more than that. They're one of the easiest ways to turn several simple foods into an actual meal. And because they don't demand electricity, water, or cooking, they become incredibly useful when options become limited. That's why experienced pantry builders almost always keep more crackers than the average household. Not because crackers are exciting, because they're dependable. The third food is canned tuna. Now we're moving into protein. One mistake people make during power outages is focusing almost entirely on carbohydrates. Rice, pasta, bread, crackers. Those foods matter. But protein matters too. Canned tuna solves that immediately. Open the can. Eat. Nothing else required. Of course, you can make sandwiches if you have bread. You can eat it with crackers. You can mix it with mayonnaise if refrigeration is still available. But even by itself, tuna provides something many pantry foods don't: a substantial meal. That's why tuna repeatedly appears on lists of practical emergency foods. Not because it's luxurious, because it works. People often buy 1 or 2 cans, then realize they should have bought 10. The fourth food is canned chicken. This is one of the most overlooked foods in the grocery store. Why? Because people compare it to fresh chicken. That's the wrong comparison. Fresh chicken belongs in the refrigerator. Canned chicken belongs in the pantry. Those are completely different jobs. During a blackout, canned chicken suddenly becomes incredibly useful. Wrap it in tortillas. Eat it with crackers. Mix it with canned vegetables. Add barbecue sauce, hot sauce, mustard, whatever you have available. The point isn't that canned chicken replaces every meal. The point is that it creates meals when many other options disappear. And that's exactly what people appreciate after the lights go out. The fifth food is canned beans. Beans quietly solve several problems at once. Protein, fiber, calories, and fullness. One reason people become frustrated during emergencies is that they eat foods that never seem to satisfy them. Snack foods disappear quickly. Sugary foods disappear quickly. Beans are different. A single can often feels like a real meal. Black beans, kidney beans, cannellini beans, pinto beans. Almost every variety works. Some people warm them, others don't. During a blackout, eating them straight from the can is perfectly possible. That's what makes them valuable. No waiting, no cooking, no electricity, just food. The sixth food is canned fruit. This one doesn't get enough attention. People immediately think about meat, protein, calories. Then several days pass, and suddenly they want something different, something sweet, something refreshing. That's where canned fruit becomes priceless. Peaches, pears, pineapple, mandarin oranges, fruit cocktail. These foods provide variety. And variety matters far more than people expect. Imagine eating nothing but crackers and canned meat for several days. Then opening a can of peaches. The difference isn't just nutritional. It's psychological. People underestimate morale constantly, until they're relying entirely on pantry foods. That's when a simple can of fruit suddenly feels like a luxury. And that's exactly why so many experienced households always keep some on hand. Because emergencies aren't only about surviving. They're about maintaining some sense of normal life. Now here's where things become even more interesting. Because the next foods aren't just convenient. Some of them solve problems most people don't even realize they'll have until the power has already been out for several days. If you've ever experienced a power outage that lasted more than a few hours, you'll notice something interesting. The first day isn't usually the hardest. The refrigerator is still cold. The freezer is still frozen. People are still optimistic. They tell themselves the electricity will probably be back before morning. Then morning arrives. The house is quieter than usual. The refrigerator doesn't sound right. The freezer feels warmer. People begin opening doors more often because they're trying to figure out what can still be saved. That's when they start looking toward the pantry. And that's where the next foods become incredibly valuable. The seventh food is tortillas. Most people think of tortillas as something they buy for tacos or wraps. Very few think of them as emergency food. That's a mistake. Tortillas are surprisingly versatile. Unlike many types of bread, they usually stay fresh longer when stored properly. They don't crumble as easily. They take up very little space. And they become the foundation for dozens of quick meals. Spread peanut butter on one. Add canned chicken. Roll up canned tuna. Fill them with canned beans. Use them instead of bread when bread has already gone stale. One package can create breakfast, lunch, or dinner with almost no effort. That's why experienced pantry builders often keep tortillas in rotation. Not because they're unusual, because they're practical. When power is unavailable, practical foods always rise to the top. The eighth food is mixed nuts. This is one of the easiest foods to underestimate. A small bag doesn't look like much. Then you start paying attention to what it actually provides. Protein, healthy fats, calories, no preparation, no refrigeration, no cooking. A handful of almonds, peanuts, walnuts, or cashews provides far more satisfaction than many processed snacks. And that's important. People often make the mistake of buying foods that disappear quickly. A family-size bag of chips can vanish in one evening. A container of mixed nuts tends to last much longer because it actually fills people up. That's why so many hikers, campers, and travelers rely on them. They deliver a lot of energy in a surprisingly small package. During a blackout, that's exactly the kind of food people appreciate. Compact, simple, dependable. The ninth food is beef jerky. Protein becomes one of the hardest things to replace once refrigeration starts becoming unreliable. Fresh meat has a very limited window. Frozen meat depends entirely on electricity. Jerky solves that problem. It's already prepared, already preserved, already ready to eat. People sometimes avoid jerky because they think it's expensive. That can be true. But value isn't always measured by price. Value is measured by usefulness. A single package fits in a backpack, a cupboard, a car, a desk drawer. And when meals become uncertain, jerky suddenly feels like a much smarter purchase than it did the week before. That's why people who spend time outdoors almost always carry it, because it doesn't ask anything from you. No pan, no stove, no microwave. Just open the package. The 10th food is trail mix. This is another food people accidentally classify as a snack. In reality, it's much more useful than that. A good trail mix combines several important food groups into one bag. Nuts, seeds, dried fruit, sometimes chocolate, sometimes granola. Every handful provides a little bit of everything. The beauty of trail mix isn't that it's perfect. It's that it's incredibly convenient. Need breakfast? Trail mix works. Need a quick lunch while dealing with problems around the house? Trail mix works. Need something to keep children satisfied until a proper meal is available? Trail mix works. People often overlook foods that require absolutely nothing. Then they realize those foods become incredibly valuable during disruptions. The 11th food is apples. This surprises people because apples aren't technically shelf-stable for months like canned food. But compared with many fresh foods, they're remarkably resilient. Stored properly, apples often last much longer than bananas, berries, grapes, or peaches. And during the first several days of a blackout, they can become one of the few remaining fresh foods in the house. They don't require cooking. They don't require preparation. They travel well. They pair perfectly with peanut butter. They're easy for children to eat. And perhaps most importantly, they provide something many pantry foods don't: freshness. After eating crackers, canned foods, and packaged products for several days, biting into a crisp apple feels surprisingly satisfying. That's why experienced shoppers often choose foods that bridge the gap between fresh and shelf-stable. Apples do exactly that. The 12th food is honey. Honey has been appreciated for thousands of years, and for good reason. Most people think of honey as something they add to tea or drizzle over toast. But during a power outage, honey becomes much more useful than that. Need quick energy? Honey provides it. Want to improve plain oats if you're making them with stored water? Honey helps. Need to make crackers, tortillas, or other simple foods more enjoyable? Honey helps. One reason people become frustrated during extended outages is that meals become repetitive. The same flavors, the same textures, the same routine. Honey quietly fixes part of that problem. A spoonful transforms ordinary food into something people actually look forward to eating. That's why so many long-term pantry builders include it. Not because it's essential for survival, Because it's essential for morale. People consistently underestimate morale until routines disappear. Then suddenly the little comforts become the things they appreciate most. And that's why honey belongs on this list. It's inexpensive. It stores well. It requires absolutely no preparation. And it improves almost everything around it. We've now reached 12 foods, but the final 4 may be the most overlooked of all, because they aren't just foods that require no cooking. They're foods that solve problems most people don't even realize they're going to have until several days after the power goes out. By now, you've probably noticed something. None of the foods on this list are particularly glamorous. There are no expensive freeze-dried meals, no futuristic survival rations, no products that promise to last forever. Instead, they're ordinary foods, the kind you walk past every week without giving them a second thought. And that's exactly why they're so valuable. People often assume preparedness is about buying unusual things. In reality, it's usually about appreciating ordinary things before everyone else does. Now let's finish the list with 4 foods that quietly solve problems most people don't think about until they're already dealing with a blackout. The 13th food is granola bars. Walk through any supermarket and you'll see dozens of different brands. Chocolate chip, oats and honey, peanut butter, fruit and nut. Most people think of them as lunchbox snacks, or something to throw into a backpack before a hike. Very few people think of them as emergency food. That's a mistake. Granola bars require absolutely nothing. No plates, no bowls, no utensils, no cooking, no cleanup. Open the wrapper. Eat. When the power goes out, that simplicity becomes surprisingly valuable. Imagine spending the entire day trying to keep food cold, checking on family members, charging phones whenever possible, and figuring out what still works. The last thing you want is another complicated task. Granola bars remove one more decision from your day. They're also easy to carry. If you need to leave the house for any reason, you already have food ready to go. That's why emergency workers, hikers, and travelers often carry them. Not because they're the perfect food, because they're dependable. Dependability is one of the most underrated qualities any food can have. The 14th food is dried fruit. This is another category people underestimate. Walk through the grocery store and you'll see bags of raisins, apricots, dates, mango, apple slices, cranberries. Most shoppers barely notice them. Fresh fruit gets all the attention, until fresh fruit starts disappearing or begins spoiling. That's when dried fruit suddenly looks very different. It stores well, travels well, requires no refrigeration, requires no preparation, and provides something pantry meals often lack: natural sweetness. Imagine eating crackers, canned beans, canned meat, and peanut butter for several days. Those foods are practical. They're filling. But eventually your taste buds start asking for something different. That's where dried fruit shines. A handful of raisins mixed with nuts creates an entirely different eating experience. Dates provide quick energy. Dried apricots add variety. Small changes like these have a much bigger impact than most people expect. Food isn't only about calories. It's also about keeping people motivated to eat well. That's one reason experienced pantry builders rarely ignore dried fruit. It improves everything around it. The 15th food is shelf-stable milk. Many people don't even realize this exists. They're familiar with refrigerated milk, maybe powdered milk. But shelf-stable cartons often sit quietly on supermarket shelves without attracting much attention, until people suddenly need them. Breakfast becomes easier. Coffee becomes possible. Tea becomes more enjoyable. cereal suddenly returns to the menu. Even simple baking becomes an option if you're able to cook later. The important point isn't that shelf-stable milk replaces fresh milk forever. It fills the gap. That's what practical pantry foods do. They bridge the distance between normal life and unexpected situations. People often discover this only after standing in front of an empty refrigerator wondering what to do next. That's when they remember walking past shelf-stable milk dozens of times without buying it. And that's exactly why it belongs on this list. The 16th and final food is ready-to-drink protein shakes. This one surprises a lot of people. After all, aren't they just gym products? Not really. Think about what happens during a prolonged power outage. People become busy. Meals become irregular. Sometimes there isn't enough time or energy to prepare proper food. A ready-to-drink protein shake solves that immediately. Open the bottle. Drink. Done. No mixing. No refrigeration before opening for many shelf-stable varieties. No preparation. It provides protein, calories, and convenience all at once. Now, does everyone need protein shakes? No, but that's not the point. The point is flexibility. The more different options you have, the easier it becomes to adapt. And adaptation is what practical preparedness is really about. Now let's step back and look at the complete list. Peanut butter, crackers, canned tuna, canned chicken, canned beans, canned fruit, tortillas, mixed nuts, beef jerky, trail mix, apples, honey, granola bars, dried fruit, shelf-stable milk, ready-to-drink protein shakes. Notice something? None of these foods require you to panic. None require complicated equipment. None require expensive survival gear. They're simply foods that continue working when many others stop working. That's what makes them valuable. People often spend years building a refrigerator. Fresh vegetables, fresh meat, fresh dairy, frozen foods. Everything depends on one thing: electricity. When electricity disappears, priorities change immediately. Suddenly people stop asking, "What sounds good for dinner?" They start asking, "What can I actually eat?" That's a completely different question. And the answers usually come from the pantry. Another interesting thing happens during every extended blackout. People begin noticing how much water and energy normal cooking actually requires. Boiling pasta, cooking rice, heating soup, using the oven, using the microwave. Every task suddenly feels more complicated. That's why no-cook foods become so valuable. They remove obstacles. They don't ask you to solve another problem before you can eat. They're already ready. That simplicity is incredibly powerful. One of the biggest mistakes people make is assuming they'll have plenty of time and energy to cook during an emergency. Sometimes they will. Sometimes they won't. Real life is unpredictable. You're dealing with spoiled food, checking on neighbors, keeping phones charged, looking after children, listening for updates, trying to stay comfortable. The simpler meals become, the easier everything else becomes too. And that's exactly what this list is about. Making difficult days just a little easier. Preparedness isn't about fear. It isn't about expecting the worst. It's about removing unnecessary stress. A jar of peanut butter removes stress. A box of crackers removes stress. A few cans of tuna remove stress. The same applies to dried fruit. Honey, trail mix, granola bars. These foods don't solve every problem, but they solve enough small problems that the entire situation becomes more manageable. And that's the lesson most experienced pantry builders learn over time. The goal isn't to own the most food. The goal is to own the right food. Food that's familiar. Food that's practical. Food that people actually enjoy eating. Because the best emergency food isn't the food with the longest label or the fanciest packaging. It's the food you'll actually reach for when the lights are out, the refrigerator is warming up, and you're standing in the kitchen wondering what comes next. Those are the foods that truly matter. And those are the foods you'll be grateful you bought long before the power ever went out.